But Mr. George, what happens then to this principle of the global ummah? The much talked about global ummah. And Iran has on many occasions said that Khamenei himself has said that, we have a shared identity. How do you see that playing its part in this?
So I'd like to recall your viewers to last year when Iran launched a wave of attacks towards Israel in terms of drones and missiles. There's 400 or 500 of them over the course of a day. And I think your viewers and your guests will recall that Israel didn't defend itself alone. It had the help of Jordan, it had the help of Saudi Arabia, it had the help of UAE, sharing radar data and other information, as well as the air forces of some of these other countries. If Iran were to launch a missile at a base and that missile will fly in Saudi Arabia or in Kuwait or in the UAE and will fly over that country's airspace, I don't have any doubt as to whose side Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Bahrain or UAE would be on. They would defend their own airspace, and they would defend the U.S. military's base as well. So it would be a grave mistake of the Iranians to turn other Islamic or Arabic countries with Muslim populations against the Iranian Republic. It would be a massive diplomatic and strategic mistake. And so whether they're vocally calling and saying, oh, all American assets are now at risk, I highly doubt that they're going to target American assets in other countries that are Muslim countries. And if they do, I believe those countries will respond in kind against the Iranians and not with the Iranians.
Ambassador Dayal, how should India be, reading the situation, watching what is unfolding?
Well, India has counseled against any escalation. It has said that the way forward is through dialogue and diplomacy. And of course, India has reasons to be concerned about any possible escalation. We have a huge Indian diaspora in the Middle East, over 10 million people, and their lives would face total dislocation and disarray in case there was an escalation. Now, let me also state that I have spent 21 years serving in Muslim countries. I've been ambassador to Kuwait, Morocco, consul general in Dubai. I have also served in Pakistan, Iran, and Egypt. And this whole idea of a ummah, a united Muslim ummah, is a myth. There are deep divisions, firstly between the Shias and the Sunnis. Iran is perceived as an enemy by many of the Sunni countries. Secondly, there are countries which are closely aligned with the United States, and they are not going to side with Iran in any sort of conflict. And these include, of course, countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, even Qatar. Qatar talks a lot and attempts to sort of appease all sides, but the US has a very big military base, and Qatar knows which side its bread is buttered. Then there are territorial disputes. UAE and Iran have big territorial disputes over these islands near the Straits of Hormuz. Bahrain is, in fact, threatened repeatedly by Iran, which says that Bahrain is not an independent country. It is a part of Iran. So there are territorial disputes also. That is why there have been endless conflicts in the Muslim Ummah. Iran fought Iraq for so many years. There was ongoing conflict in Syria. There are conflicts within the Muslim world at so many places, Morocco and Algeria, Egypt and Libya. So this whole idea of the Muslim Ummah uniting against the United States is a myth, and the US president knows it very well. That is why he has fashioned out his policy, and he has also warned that any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed till now. So if the Iranians are wise, they should try and de-escalate, because any escalation will not work in their.
Okay. Ambassador, then let me ask you, the question that people are, talking about, actually whispering, is the role of Russia and China. One scenario is that they will, obviously on the face of it, call for restraint, etc., etc., but lend support to Iran.
They may assist Iran with weapons and materials, but will they fight alongside Iran? I have serious doubts. I don't think that they will. In any case, the Russians are already deeply involved in their conflict with Ukraine, and they cannot afford a diversion in the context of the Iran-Israel and now the Iran-US conflict. As regards China, it's a very clever player. It will want the conflict to escalate to the extent that its own interests are not hurt. But if you ask me, will the Chinese step in militarily? No way. The Chinese know that any intervention in a military fashion by them is not in their interest because they have other sort of interests, and those are centered around the Indian Ocean region, around their own territory. So I don't see that the Chinese will intervene. And I think the United States also knew it because President Trump has taken this decisive action, fully knowing what the other big players are going to find as their policy and their interest.
Okay, on that note, I also want to ask Mr. George on the Pakistan question. Pakistan shares hundreds of kilometers in border with Iran. Where does Israel view the role of Pakistan? It has said that it is an ally of Iran, but very clearly there has been a certain closeness of the United States with Pakistan as well recently. So how does Israel view Pakistan's role in this?
Well, I would think that Israel would be quietly, maybe even behind the scenes, talking with the Pakistanis and urging them to just stay silent. That would be the best course of action. You know, as you and your viewers know, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Prime Minister Modi have developed a very close relationship, and Israel sees India as a major ally and close strategic partner. I think Pakistan, and again, judging from what just happened with Pakistan nominating President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, and I think many of your viewers in India would recognize the absurdity of Pakistan nominating a Nobel Peace Prize.
It's actually a disqualification if you actually come to think of it.
I understand. I was going to be a little more diplomatic in saying it. But having said that, you know, I think given the relationship, at least the overt relationship that we've been seeing recently between Pakistan and the U.S., that Pakistan will probably stay relatively muted here. They may give a little bit of lip service to the Iranian regime. I don't see it going any further than that.
Okay, all right. We have some breaking updates coming in. We have the first response from the United Nations. The UN chief has said and has issued a statement saying gravely alarmed by the United States bombing of the Iranian nuclear sites. The UN chief says, and I quote, "I am gravely alarmed by the use of force by the United States against Iran today, reiterating that there is no military solution. This is a dangerous escalation in a region that is already on the edge and a direct threat to international peace and security." Pranesh, earlier we were also speaking about the role of United Nations. Now United Nations expressing alarm over what has happened.
What can the United Nations do? You know, it is not the best thing to say, but I'm choosing my words responsibly, Pratibha. I think the UN should be shut down. Plain and simple, the United Nations has, you know, is well past its sell-by date, you know, whatever you want to call it. And both Mr. George and Ambassador Dayal will bear me out on this, that there is no mandate that the UN has. UN is only the platform for the United States. You know, it does not serve the interest of the whole world. And increasingly so, as we've seen on many occasions, the United Nations has actually done a lot of disservice, not just to its, you know, so-called supposed mandate, but also to the larger cause of humanity. Mr. George, you go first, then I'll bring in Ambassador Dayal and Srinjoy.
Well, if I were to India, I'd be buying you a beer right now for your previous words. Yeah, listen, you know, I don't think you have to go too deep in any Israeli citizen's consciousness to know what they think about the UN. It's really a vacuous organization. It has no purpose. This is an organization that puts countries like Iran as the head of the Human Rights Council. It's quite ridiculous. They've lost their way. They don't have a mandate. You have Russia, who sits as a permanent member of the Security Council, starting a war with Ukraine, and a president who's sent 1 million of his soldiers to their death, vetoing resolutions, while you have a country like India who, in my opinion, has far surpassed Russia as a superpower and should be a permanent member of the Security Council. So there's really no reason for the UN to exist. I agree with you. I certainly would defer to the ambassador for his perspective, as he has much more diplomatic experience than I do, and I'm not being very diplomatic right now.
But I'm sure ambassador will be diplomatic in his answer, not as candid as both of us have been. We have the luxury of not carrying that tag of being a diplomat. Yes, Ambassador Dayal, what do you make of the UN, sir?
Well, first of all, have I been diplomatic in what I have said?
Not so far, not so
forthright, and I have played it very straight. I have put across what I feel, that it's a dangerous situation, and I have clearly portrayed what the perspectives are from the point of view of the United States, Israel, and Iran. Now, I don't agree with you that the United Nations should be wound up. I think what needs to happen is that the United Nations should be revamped. Mr. George was correct in saying that a country like India, which is much more significant in the global scene today than even Russia, should be a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. So the solution is not closing shop. The solution is revamping the order, making those arrangements, because the United Nations was set up in 1945. India was not even an independent country at that time. The world has changed. Today's world has different realities, and that is why countries like India, Japan, Germany, and Brazil have been pleading for a reform of the UN Security Council and have been saying that these countries should be admitted as permanent members, because it is important to have the United Nations transformed into an effective body. I'm stating it very plainly, because this is what has been stated, in fact, by our government on so many occasions. Let me just add one thing. It is not correct to think that the United Nations doesn't have a mandate for peace. It has that mandate. Unfortunately, the mandate is continuously obstructed by the veto power which the P5 have in the UN Security.
You know, Ambassador, I have a lot of respect for you, and I just have one point of difference. Just because an organization was set up in the 1945 does not mean that, you stop living in the reality. The United Nations is still in 1945. It hasn't moved beyond. The world has moved on. And, and like Mr. George was saying, that regime change sometimes becomes the only option. Like Israelis want the regime change in Iran for things to restart. Look, reform, all the talks of reform has been met with nothing. We are banging our head on the wall. There's no reform in the United Nations. So unless you have that, for lack of a better word, regime change, so to say, the UN, and how do you do it? You dismantle this current, setup that you have in name of United Nations. Looks very fancy, sounds good, the United Nations. But the United Nations is doing a disservice to the name, to its charter, to the mandate. Srinjoy?
It must be remembered that the United Nations was once a very effective force. One Indian soldier has won the Paramveer Chakra for his actions in the Congo, fighting for the United Nations. Let's not forget that. The United Nations had a very strong fighting force in Korea in the 50s and in Congo and in other places. But the United Nations comprises all of us, and at this point in the world there is no will to have that kind of force. So unless there is a complete change in the United Nations, unless at least 4 members are made permanent members, or as some countries have said, like Indonesia, the curtailment of veto powers happen, there will always be vetoes exercised and serious action not happen. At this point, two major wars are going on in the world. Russia, Ukraine, and that's been going on for 3.5 years. This problem in West Asia began on October 7, and we've already got to quite a year and a bit. Now, at this point, there is no fighting force. There is no blue helmet fighting force that can actually come between these two countries in Russia, Ukraine, or in West Asia and ensure that there is a blue line of peace. It just isn't there. The UN force of the Congo, where an Indian got a Paravid Chakra, is just not there anymore, or there is no will to have it. So as long as there is no will to have it, the UN will not be an important force to maintain peace. That is where the problem is.
You're saying
in
the same
Lebanon,
thing, Shinjo, it's just that, you know, you're being very, very, I don't want to use the word diplomatic again, because I run the risk of, antagonizing Ambassador Dayal. But look, even Ambassador Dayal has agreed that the mandate has been betrayed by the United Nations. You need to restructure it. How do we do that? You know, it's a policy decision, will take a lot of work, but let's focus on what we have, Pratibha. A lot of updates coming in.
Yes, a lot of